Welcome to the Mental Minute, an AI-generated podcast where we bring you a fresh perspective on mind-expanding topics. Today,
Learn.
we're diving into the fascinating world of learning by teaching,
Right.
also known as LDL.
Interesting.
It might sound counterintuitive,
Mm.
but research shows that explaining a concept to someone else,
Yeah.
even if there's no one there, can supercharge your own learning.
What's intriguing about LDL is that it flips the traditional learning model on its head.
Oh,
Instead of passively absorbing information,
okay.
you're actively processing and restructuring it almost like you're becoming your own teacher.
It's like you're taking ownership of the information rather than just letting it wash over you.
Yeah.
But how does that actually translate into deeper understanding?
Think of it like this. Imagine you have to explain a complex topic to a friend.
Okay.
You wouldn't just regurgitate facts.
Right.
You'd break it down into digestible chunks, use analogies, and anticipate their questions. That process forces you to engage with the material on a much deeper level.
So it's about making those connections and seeing the bigger picture, not just memorizing isolated facts.
Precisely, and it goes beyond just understanding.
Oh.
When you prepare to teach, you're also forced to anticipate potential stumbling blocks,
Yeah,
which requires you to think critically and consider different perspectives.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
You're not just learning the material, you're learning how to learn it
Right.
and how to teach it.
Exactly. And by the way, this concept isn't exactly new.
Oh, really?
While the systematic study of LDL began in the mid-20th century,
Okay.
the practice itself has roots that go way back.
I'm curious, how far back are we talking?
Well, think about the traditional apprenticeship model.
Okay.
A master craftsman would teach their apprentice by having them participate in the work,
Right.
gradually increasing their responsibility.
Yeah.
That's essentially LDL in action.
So it's been woven into the fabric of human learning for centuries, often out of necessity.
Right, and it's fascinating how those informal practices eventually evolved into a formal teaching method.
Yeah.
In the 1980s, a researcher named Jean-Paul Martin really championed the method and gave it a theoretical framework,
Interesting.
calling it Lernen durch Lehren, which is German for learning by teaching.
So where did LDL gain the most traction? I'm guessing Germany, given the origin of the name.
You guessed it. Ironically, it faced some pushback at first. The German education system was quite traditional, but the effectiveness of LDL was undeniable, and it eventually became more widely accepted.
Okay, so we've talked about the history and theory behind LDL, but how does it actually play out in a classroom?
Typically, the teacher introduces the material, laying down a foundation.
Yep.
Then students are divided into groups and assigned a portion of the material to master
Got it.
and prepare to teach to their peers.
So there's still some initial guidance from the teacher,
Yeah,
but the students are really taking the reins in terms of their learning.
that's right. And the beauty is that it encourages creativity.
Okay.
Students are challenged to find innovative ways to explain concepts, use real-world examples, and make it engaging for their classmates.
It sounds like a much more dynamic and participatory approach compared to the traditional lecture format.
Absolutely. And it doesn't stop there. LDL promotes teamwork,
Okay.
communication skills, and even builds confidence in students.
So it's not just about mastering the subject matter, but also developing valuable life skills. This is really making me rethink my own approach to learning.
Yeah,
I'm intrigued by this plastic platypus learning you mentioned earlier.
sure.
Could you tell us more about that?
Of course. It's a related concept where instead of teaching a person, you explain the material to an inanimate object. It might sound strange,
Yeah.
but even talking out loud to a rubber duck can solidify your understanding.
Wait, so I can just chat with my houseplant and that'll help me learn. How does that work?
It might sound silly,
Yeah.
but it taps into that same principle of active engagement. By forcing yourself to articulate the information,
Okay.
you expose any gaps in your knowledge and ultimately retain it better.
It's like having a built-in study buddy, even if that buddy's a rubber duck.
Exactly. Interestingly, this concept is also used in the world of programming.
Oh.
It's called rubber duck debugging, where programmers explain their code line by line to a rubber duck to uncover errors.
It's amazing how this simple act of verbalizing can be so powerful.
It is.
So for someone listening who's interested in trying this LDL approach,
Right.
what are some practical ways to incorporate it into their own learning?
There are tons of ways to make LDL a part of your learning routine.
Let's hear about them. This is fascinating.
One simple way is to just pretend you're teaching the concept to someone else.
Okay.
Imagine you're explaining it to a friend, a family member, or even your pet.
So like if I'm reading a book, I could try summarizing the key points to an imaginary audience.
Exactly. Or if you're learning a new skill,
Yeah.
try breaking it down step by step and explaining each step out loud as if you were guiding someone through it.
That's a great idea. It forces you to slow down and really think about the process. And what about those times when you get stuck? Is that a bad sign?
Not at all. In fact, it's a good sign.
Mm.
It means you've identified a gap in your understanding, and
Oh,
that's
yeah.
where the real learning happens. Go back, review that part,
Got it.
and make sure you can articulate it clearly.
So it's like those moments of struggle are actually opportunities for deeper learning.
Precisely. Another tip is to embrace that plastic platypus method we talked about.
Right.
Find an inanimate object like a rubber duck or even a house plant
Mm-hmm.
and explain the concept to it. It might feel silly at first,
Yeah.
but the act of verbalizing helps cement the information in your mind.
It's like having a judgment-free listener who's always willing to hear you out.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned earlier that LDL has been shown to improve knowledge retention.
Right.
Could you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. Studies have consistently shown that students who learn by teaching retain information much better than those who simply listen to lectures.
That makes sense. It's like the more you interact with information,
Yeah.
the more it sticks.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like building multiple pathways in your brain to access that information later on.
Okay.
By explaining it,
Yeah.
summarizing it, and applying it, you're reinforcing those pathways and making it easier to recall the information in the future.
So it's not just about stuffing information into your brain,
Yeah,
but about creating a strong network of connections.
precisely. Now I know what you might be thinking.
Oh.
Is LDL some kind of miracle learning cure-all?
Right.
Well, like any method, it's not without its challenges.
I was just about to ask about that. Are there any potential downsides or pitfalls to be aware of?
Of course. It requires careful planning and execution.
Okay.
It's not something you can just throw together at the last minute.
So both the teacher and the student need to be intentional about the process.
Exactly. The teacher needs to provide clear guidelines,
Yeah.
structure the learning experience effectively,
Mhm.
and ensure that all students are actively participating.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And what about from the student's perspective? Are there any potential challenges there?
Well, some students might be hesitant or uncomfortable with the idea of teaching their peers.
Right.
It can feel intimidating, especially for those who are more introverted or shy.
It's like stepping outside your comfort zone and embracing a new role.
Exactly. It's important to create a supportive and encouraging environment where everyone feels safe to take risks and make mistakes.
So it's about fostering a sense of trust and collaboration within the learning environment.
Right. It's also crucial to provide opportunities for students to practice and develop their teaching skills gradually.
Okay.
It's not about throwing them in the deep end, but about gradually increasing their responsibility and autonomy.
So it's a process of building confidence and competence over time.
Yeah.
You mentioned flipped learning earlier in connection with LDL.
Yeah.
Could you explain how those two concepts relate to each other?
Flipped learning is a teaching approach where students learn new material outside of class,
Right.
typically through videos or online resources. Then they use class time for active learning activities like discussions, problem solving, or, you guessed it, LDL.
So instead of listening to a lecture during class, they're engaging with the material in a more hands-on way.
Exactly. LDL can be a powerful tool within a flipped classroom setting.
Got it.
Students come to class with some foundational knowledge from the pre-class materials,
Mm.
and then they can use the class time to deepen their understanding by teaching each other.
It's like maximizing the use of both individual and collaborative learning time. You also mentioned some interesting applications of LDL beyond the traditional classroom,
Right.
specifically in the field of human-robot interaction.
Yeah.
That sounds fascinating.
Uh-huh.
Could you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. Researchers are exploring how LDL principles can be used to help robots learn from and teach humans.
So robots, as both students and teachers, that's pretty mind-blowing.
It might sound futuristic,
Yeah.
but it's becoming a reality.
Wow.
For instance, imagine a robot learning a complex surgical technique from a human expert. It could then teach that technique to a novice surgeon, providing guidance and feedback along the way.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So in this scenario, the robot is both learning from a human expert and then becoming a teacher itself.
Exactly. And this has some fascinating implications.
Okay.
First, it allows robots to learn more effectively. By having to explain and demonstrate a skill,
Mm-hmm.
The robot has to solidify its own understanding.
Like the robot is going through that same LDL process that we've been talking about.
Precisely. And second, it opens up exciting possibilities for human-robot collaboration.
Yeah.
By teaching each other, humans and robots can develop a shared understanding and work together more effectively.
So it's not just about robots replacing humans,
Right.
but about humans and robots learning from each other and becoming partners in various fields.
Exactly. And it raises some profound questions about the nature of learning and intelligence itself.
Wow.
What does it mean for a robot to teach? And how can we design robots that are effective teachers?
Those are big questions. And it sounds like LDL is at the forefront of exploring those uncharted territories. This has been an incredible journey exploring LDL from its historical roots to its potential applications in the future. What a versatile and impactful concept.
It really is, and it's a journey that's far from over. As we continue to learn more about how the brain works and how we learn best, LDL is likely to play an even bigger role in shaping the future of education and technology.
So to bring it back to our listeners, what's one key insight you'd like them to take away from our discussion today?
I'd say it's this. Learning by teaching is not just a pedagogical technique. It's a fundamental principle of how we learn and grow.
Okay.
By embracing the role of teacher, even in informal settings,
Right.
we can unlock our own potential and make learning a more engaging and rewarding experience.
That's a powerful message. So as we wrap up this part of our conversation about LDL, what are some practical tips our listeners can use to start incorporating this method into their lives? I love that idea. It's like turning everyday interactions into learning opportunities.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to get creative. You could start a blog, make videos explaining concepts,
Yeah.
or even just jot down your explanations in a journal.
It's like building your own personal knowledge base and sharing it with the world, even if it's just a small corner of it.
Right. And remember the plastic platypus method?
Oh, yeah.
Find an inanimate object and explain a concept to it. It might sound silly, but it works.
I'm definitely going to try that one. It's like having a judgment-free audience that's always willing to listen. But ultimately, LDL is about more than just techniques, right?
Absolutely. It's about approaching the world with curiosity and a willingness to share what you know. It's about recognizing that teaching isn't just something you do in a classroom. It's woven into the fabric of how we learn and grow as human beings.
That's a beautiful way to put it. So as we wrap up our exploration of LDL, what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I'd say this. Don't underestimate the power of teaching, even if you don't have a classroom full of students. The act of explaining a concept to yourself or to an imaginary audience can unlock a whole new level of understanding. And who knows, you might even inspire someone else along the way.
That's a wonderful reminder. So the next time you're struggling to grasp a new concept, put on your imaginary teacher hat and see what happens. You might be surprised at how much you learn and how much you grow in the process.
You might even find yourself enjoying the journey of learning more than ever before.
Thanks for joining us on the Mental Minute. Until next time, keep those minds sharp and don't forget to embrace the power of learning by teaching.